Yes, Santa Claus was a real person. No, he did not live at the North Pole. Now let's sort all this out. The name Santa Claus is simply a variant of the Dutch Sinterklaas, which means Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas lived from around the year 260, 270 to somewhere around the 335, 342 mark. Whatever the precise dates, Nicholas lived through a time of enormous change, from when Christianity was still being persecuted across the Roman world to when it became the faith of the emperor himself. Now, after rummaging through the available historical sources, here's what can be known about him. Nicholas was born into a well-to-do Greek Christian family here in Patara, in Anatolia, then part of the Eastern Roman Empire. Even as a child, he was noted for his purity of character, something that only bloomed the broader and brighter as the years went by. His parents both died when he was about 18, leaving him considerable wealth, which he had not the slightest inclination to fritter away on himself. Now, it just so happened that a wealthy neighbor of his had fallen into financial ruin, and, having nothing left and nowhere to turn, with no possibility for providing dowries for his 3 daughters, was in desperation considering selling his daughters into prostitution to keep his family from beggary. Nicholas, on hearing this, went to the man's house at night and tossed a sack of gold inside. He repeated this surreptitious charity until all the daughters were married. No chimneys were involved, but presents popping up seemingly by magic in the night must sound familiar. Anyway, Nicholas ended up becoming the Bishop of Myra, located here and which is now the Turkish town of Damre. As bishop, Nicholas taught, preached, baptized and cared for the poor, but soon after, in the year 303, Emperor Diocletian initiated the Great Persecution to stamp out Christianity once and for all, with untold numbers of believers being imprisoned, tortured, and executed. Nicholas was among them, but considered himself lucky that he was only tortured. His fellow bishop Methodius back in Patara had not been so fortunate. The persecution was a failure, and Christianity only grew more and finally ended when Emperor Constantine declared himself a Christian. By this time, Nicholas had a snowy white beard and was among the empire's bishops invited by the emperor to the famous Council of Nicaea, convened in order to iron out issues of doctrine. After centuries of being scattered and disorganized, Christian leaders finally had the chance to collectively address the more difficult theological concepts and agree on some conclusions. At that time, there was a popular movement called Arianism, named for the Libyan priest Arius, which considered Christ, God the Son, to be a lesser created being of a different substance and not the equal of God the Father. This challenged the doctrine of the Trinity, where God is one and consists of 3 persons who are co-equal in substance as one triune God, which had plenty of scriptural support itself. The council eventually found the evidence against Arianism too strong and officially agreed upon the Trinitarian idea of God, which Nicholas himself believed. One story has it that Nicholas stood up before the council and held up a brick and said that just as God is Father, Son, and Spirit, and still one, so too was this brick one substance, though formed from earth, fire, and water. Here we see a picture of Nicholas slapping the heretic Arius in the face. I guess Arius had been on a list that was checked twice and found to be naughty, not nice. This, however, did not actually happen and is a prime example of artistic license. Artists wanted to depict Nicholas as a fiery defender of orthodoxy, but Nicholas was simply too kindly a gentleman to assault his fellow man. Nicholas returned to Myra and built his church. As an old man, he was still active in doing good, preventing innocent men from being beheaded by bribed officials, for instance, and later died peacefully in his sleep. Nicholas's popularity grew more and more, with all sorts of legends being attributed to him. In the Middle Ages, the feast day of St. Nicholas had become the 6th of December, and became a time for giving gifts to children. Martin Luther did not like Nicholas being so associated, and helped move all that propagation of presents to the 25th, the day of the Christ child, the Christkind, which became corrupted into Kris Kringle. But the bond the spirit of the season shared with Nicholas was too strong, and he remained associated with it, and the modern Santa Claus figure is essentially an American fusion of the Dutch depiction of St. Nicholas and the Old English jolly personification of the season known as Father Christmas, seen here representing the ghost of Christmas present in Charles Dickens's book A Christmas Carol. In 1821, an illustrated American poem showed the saint with a reindeer. The more famous poem, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, had the saint in a flying sleigh with flying reindeer, bearing gifts and entering a house through the chimney to put the gifts in stockings, and yes, the author may have been on drugs. The appearance of Santa was an accumulation of the cartoons of German-American Thomas Nast, who may have introduced the North Pole myth, and the famous illustrations of an American of Swedish-Finnish descent called Haden Sundblom, who was commissioned by the Coca-Cola Company in 1931 to illustrate Santa for their advertisements, and his portrayal of Santa Claus as a portly, kindly grandfather spread worldwide and established forever the popular image of Santa Claus. Contrary to popular belief, Santa was not depicted in red and white to mirror the colors of the Coca-Cola logo. He had been envisioned and pictured in those colors long before. So that was the story of Agios Nikolaos, a humble Greek bishop famed for gift-giving, and how he snowballed into modern mythology.